Cool. So as everyone's joining us, I'd like to kick it off by doing a quick introduction. And if one of you can just let people in as I'm doing this introduction, that would be amazing. Um, so hi everyone, please excuse my voice. I'm recovering from a viral. That's the first thing. I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer. I'm Naimisha. I'm the founder of Products by Women. Thank you all so much for being here on a Friday evening. Before we do get started, I do want to say thank you to our illustrious panel and my friends here. And also thank you all for being here and investing in yourself on a Friday evening. This is amazing. We have a great turnout and we'll have a lot more people joining us. Today we have with us, and I'm going to be using all your titles here, like just to make it like fun. Dr. Aditi Paul, Dr. Professor Aditi Paul, who's an author, influencer, professor at Pace University. She's also a UX professional, which is amazing. We have Professor Douglas, who teaches at Columbia University, and he also works in tech, and he's just amazing. We have Rebekah, who's a dear friend of mine. She's an author, the Forbes contributor, founder of OwnTrail. We have Annika, who's a podcaster. She's an author. She has some amazing books coming up, and she's just released another book. We have Shelmina, who's a tech leader and also the author of Show Your Worth. Before we do get started, I do want to go over some quick housekeeping announcements. Number one is this event is being recorded, and we will be sending you a copy with an email and all the other information. So don't feel like you have to take notes. And we'll also be posting all the information on productsbywomen.com. In some time, I will also be dropping a bunch of resources, including our Slack channel where you can connect with women in product. We have about 2,000 plus women out there, so keep an eye out for that. This video is your video and your audio is disabled just so that it does not interfere with the programming today. But do feel free to drop all your questions in the chat box. We will be taking them at the end of the session. Lastly, if you'd like to speak at an upcoming session, do email us at info@productsbywomen.com. And with that, I am so excited to kick off today's session with my very first question. And this one goes to all of you, and I'll probably start this one off with Rebekah, you. And then, you can pass it to the next person and the next person pass it to the other, which is, do you remember the moment, you decided that you're going to be writing a book? I'd love to know what that aha moment felt like and like what sparked that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I guess I'll give the background that I haven't always been a writer. I discovered that I liked writing at all when I was about 36, and I got asked to write a guest blog post for a small women in tech blog, and people really liked it. It was kind of about imperfect success, and I kind of on a whim, I know I'm going the long way around to your question, but sorry, on a whim, I sent the post to Arianna Huffington and ended up getting a byline in Huffington Post from that. And then I just became a prolific writer from there. I was like, oh, this is so much fun. I didn't even realize I liked it. So I like to mention that because I think a lot of times there's this kind of preconception that you need to have been like writing your whole life to get to that point. But so once I spent, a couple of years writing a ton and exploring different topics, I felt like it would be really cool to write a book. So that was kind of on my mind, but I didn't feel like I don't feel like a fiction writer really. And I didn't feel like I was expert enough in anything to be a nonfiction writer, or like I'd want to write a whole book on any one topic. So those were just kind of things that were incubating in my mind. The short answer that I'm getting to is that it came to me in the middle of the night and I woke up and I was like, this is the book I need to write, which is not unusual for me. That's how most of my ideas come out. And so I had this idea, like a choose your own adventure book that's exploring the different decisions and pathways that women take through their lives. And, there's a lot of data and experience leading up to that and a desire to write, but it all kind of came together in this idea. And I told a couple of my employees the next morning about the idea, and they were like, oh, that's really cool. Kind of younger women, they're like, oh, I'd read that. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. And then I did. So that's how it happened, kind of the lead up and then the idea. And I'll pass it on to Aditi.
I had no such strike of Just like, I need to know. All of the work that I do always comes from a point of desperation. I have worked hard to get my grades up because it was desperate times, and this was also one of them. But the way I found out the niche of writing the topic, honestly, when people say that you do not motivate yourself to work, you work yourself to motivation, that was very true for me. I followed my curiosity. So, just to give you some background, my research has always been in the area of online dating. And in 2020, just like a lot of us, I was also bored, but I also had a little sense of urgency in me because I was going up for tenure as a professor. And I was also considering a green card route, and that required me to produce research. So I had that kind of burning sensation underlying my casual demeanor, if you may. So in that mind space, I started reading a couple of books in the space of online dating. One of them was American Hookup: The New Culture of Sex on Campus. It was a book written by Lisa Wade, because I just wanted to know what hookups were and how online dating websites are being used for that. As I was reading the book, I found out there are certain things that this author was not talking about. And when I did a Google Scholar search, I saw that the angle that I was looking for is not present. That was my first spark of understanding and identifying that maybe this can be extrapolated into a research project, which can then be converted into writing a book. So that's how my book, shameless plug, came into being. This is not your fiction book. This is not a trade book. This is an academic book meant for academic scholars and graduate students, etc. But since the topic was so, for the lack of a better term, sexy, I wanted it to be accessible to the common public. So when it came time, and we can talk about that when the time comes, when the time came to publicize my work, I chose the route of podcasts and social media to dilute my heavily statistical knowledge into regular parlance so people can use it and run with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aditi. And I'd love to kind of switch gears and ask Anika for her experience, because her genre is completely different. It's rom-com. So, Anita.
It is. So I am a little bit different from the other panelists in the sense that I write completely made up fiction here in the rom-com realm. So my first book actually came out in 2015. It's not on shelves anymore. But I think I've always obviously been a writer. There was a lot of angsty journaling in high school. I think that's kind of where it started. Just straight trash about just the random. I read it now and it doesn't even make sense. I have no idea who I'm talking about in any of these because there's code names and there's like random things in case somebody found this journal somewhere, which would never have happened anyway because it was always with me. But anyway. So I think my parents actually tried to tell me to go into journalism when I was preparing for college. And I actually wanted to go into healthcare at the time, which is what I ended up doing. But there was a summer between my first master's degree and when I had quit work. And it was about 6 to 7 weeks before the grad program started. And so it ended up becoming, I came downstairs, I remember just being like, I want to write my book. I was fresh off a breakup. And so I just my life is going to change. This is how I'm going to deal with it. And it ended up being this catharsis. And I wrote my first book. I went in a little bit naively. I ended up getting an agent, friend, then got my first book deal from that. And then in 2017, after reading the first book, an editor at Source Books offered me a 3-book deal with South Asian characters to come up with a rom-com series focused on different friends in this friend group. And so the first book, Love Chai and Other 4-Letter Words, came out in September of last year. And the second, Sugar, Spice, and Camp White Ice, comes out in May of next year. And the third will come out the year after that. So it's been a little bit roundabout. I feel like it was always destined, but sometimes time and life have its own plans, and it kind of has to be the right place, right time sort of situation sometimes for the juices to kind of start flowing and for lightning to strike. So yeah, it started in 2014, and now I feel very, very lucky to be doing what I do.
That's incredible. That's probably going to be our next Netflix original, number
I
one.
really hope so. I could hope, especially now seeing this sort of diverse panel of just work that's coming out on all of these different streaming platforms is incredible. So I think South Asians as a whole are having a moment, and I hope to God that it continues.
That's awesome. And Shelmina, over to you next. love to hear your story.
I am in awe and so honored to be amongst all these prolific writers because I am not a writer. My degrees are in computer science and mathematics, and writing this book was perhaps one of the hardest things I've done in my professional life. And trust me, I've done hard things. But this book was, it actually became a calling. And so I was willing to overcome whatever I had to in order to write it. And there wasn't this one fine day I decided to write a book. No. What happened is, to give you just some context, I come from very humble beginnings in Tanzania. I was the first person in my family to obtain a college degree. The town that I lived in didn't even have education past 10th grade. So I had to leave home at 15 to lift myself and my family out of poverty. I thought I need to get an education. I need to get a college degree. And no education past 10th grade. We have no money. No one in the family has ever been to college. So there's all these things, but I was convinced that if I got a college degree, then we won't be poor anymore. Fast forward, I first went to India, got a degree in mathematics, and I realized that that was not going to lift us out of poverty. So then I came to the United States and I got a degree from from the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse in computer science. And you know, when I started my career, first of all, I was on a student visa, so there was only one company that would even interview me. And so, Aditi, you talked about green card, right? I was on a one-year student visa, and this one company offered me a job, paid me $27,000 a year, and I thought, that's it. I've arrived, I've made it, I'm never going to be poor again. I go to work with a spring in my step, really grateful for this opportunity, and immediately started realizing that there was no one, not just in the leadership ranks, but there was no one who looked like me at my workplace. There was no one who spoke like me at my workplace. Everyone had more advanced degrees than I did. Everyone had degrees from better universities than I did. Ivy League colleges, masters, PhDs, you name it. And so my mind actually started playing tricks with myself. I started questioning, what is it that I would know that they don't already know? But I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, I had undermined my capabilities, so I was afraid to speak up in meetings. I did a great job on my own little project, but I was afraid to speak up in meetings because I figured they were all smarter than me. What would I know that they don't already know? But within a year, if I didn't figure out how to contribute unique value, not just value that anyone else can contribute, but unique value, then they wouldn't extend my visa. Actually, by law, they were required to hire someone else. So you talk about desperation, Aditi. This was the height of it. Within a year, I would go back to being poor. And so I had to, that's where I started. You will know much more later. But I ended up becoming one of the highest ranking women of color at IBM, running billion-dollar businesses. And I rose up while being a single mother of 2 children since they were 2 and 4. So I left IBM in 2014 with the desire to pay forward. You just heard where I came from. You just heard what I achieved. And in that process, I learned a lot. Not just to overcome the challenges, but I also learned how to seize opportunities. And I learned how to harness the opportunities and create tailwinds that will accelerate my success. So I knew a lot. And I started sharing with people. I spoke at conferences, I spoke at corporations. And in 2018, because, you know, career is not a light switch that you learn something and the next day you get promoted. It's a long game. It's about making choices. It's about showing up a certain way. in 2018, within a span of 2 weeks, it's almost like this universe is conspiring. Within a span of 2 weeks, I have over 200 messages, phone calls, LinkedIn messages, text messages, WhatsApp messages, because I had spoken all over the world. And I learned that these women are now telling me that my insights have accelerated and advanced their career. That's when I decided that I know something that can actually change the face of gender equality in leadership roles, that I could be the change agent to ignite this fire, that it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter that you're a mother. It doesn't matter that you're a single mother. Here's how you succeed in corporate America, because as you professors know, over 50% of the workforce are women. At the first promotion level, depending on whose research you're looking at, 66 or 67 are men. 33, 34 are women. We didn't become stupid overnight. We have more advanced degrees. Not me. I only have a bachelor's degree from a small university. But a lot of women have more advanced degrees. They have better grades in school. And yet, when they enter corporate America, the game has changed and they keep doing the same thing they did while they were in college, burning the midnight oil and saying yes to everything and putting everybody else's requests ahead of their own self. And that's not how you succeed. And I know how to succeed. So I started, I decided I was going to write a book, but oh my God, I couldn't. I mean, for a year, I wrote and I just scratched, because I said, even I wouldn't read this shit, excuse my French. I just, because I don't know how to write. But I also didn't want a ghostwriter. And so I want people on this call to know that you can get help. I was, however, stubborn that I'm not going to get a ghostwriter. It has to be me who is writing this book. And so that's why the struggle was real. I got editors to help me with my book proposal. I got editors to help me with my manuscript, the whole every step of the way. But I had the knowledge. I knew what I knew, and not only did that help me, but it had changed the career trajectory of thousands of women worldwide. And I wanted to change the career trajectory of millions of women worldwide. And so my book was a way to getting to them. So my calling was way bigger than my inability to write. But here we are. My book has been released. And when I see an Amazon review from a girl that I've never heard of, that I don't know, and she tells me that your story has inspired me because I had decided leadership was not meant for me. And now I have decided leadership is meant for me. And so, I went through this when there was no one in my company that looked like me, let alone the leadership ranks, no one in any meetings. I started telling myself, I don't belong here. But I did. I belonged there. I had unique value to offer to the world and my company. And I want each one of you to recognize that.
Oh, Shelmina, I have goosebumps as you just narrated that entire thing, as a mother, as an immigrant, as someone who literally messaged Aditi saying that I'm going to hang up after this event and work through the night. I think I may not be doing that after this. So, but no, I mean, this is so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, I really want to pass it to Douglas to share his journey. And then I have a bunch of other questions that I want to get to too.
Wow, Shelmina, I have to tell you, I mean, that story, if that's not a Products by Women supportive story, nothing is. I think, Naimisha, that sounds like it just falls right within, what you're trying to do and the work you're doing with the folks in your membership. And Annika, I want to say, one is I wish I could fabricate a story from just nothing. And you also reminded me that I was going to go to journalism school on my bachelor's degree 5 million years ago, and I wound up going into music instead, but I was headed into journalism. I totally forgot that until you just mentioned that. And I think it just shows all these stories, what a circuitous, unexpected route this writer's journey can be. I had started writing in papers. So I was doing the technology conference circuit and speaking at, and for that you have to write, you know, papers to be in the proceedings. So they're very technology oriented papers, pretty dry. You know, you try to put some story in, but you know, it's technology. And then at one point, a former teacher was writing a book and somehow got behind schedule and asked if I could write a chapter for that book. And I did that, and that was kind of the first introduction, and that was for a book in McGraw-Hill, and it was a technology chapter. And then I wound up being invited by McGraw-Hill to write a whole book. And I put together, I couldn't do it on my own because, as all the other authors know, this book writing is not an easy task. So I put together a couple of other co-authors. I was the lead author on that one. And at the same time, I was still teaching Columbia is actually at that time the chair of the database track at their certificate program. And I got approached by Prentice Hall to lead a series of workbooks that they were putting together. And I co-authored one of them, and the others also did very well. And we actually created a whole video series that then they relaunched the books along with the videos. And amazingly, I did not expect it. Between those two books, I sold about 50,000 copies. Those are on two major publishers. The upside of doing that is that, especially in the early 2000s, and there were still bookstores, you could walk into Barnes & Noble and see, you know, 5-year books in a display of McGraw-Hill books or Prentice Hall books. In addition, they were selling the books, and we got a $10,000 buy by a university to be a textbook. So, but that's a very dry writing experience. I mean, it's fun. It's a lot of work, and writing those two books at the same time was a killer. But many years, there were academic papers in between, but many years went by, and in between, the stress of being a tech leader, the stress of having, you know, also teaching 3 courses at Columbia, working on my dissertation and getting that thing done, trying to get some family time in somewhere, just was killing me. And I got into mindfulness to try to deal with all the stress. So somewhere around 2018, 2019, I started having this idea of creating a book called Mindfulness for Technology Leaders. And they really need it. And I wound up I'm qualified to teach MBSR, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction, which was being taught at the time at UMass Medical Center. And I ran a series called Mindfulness for Geeks. And I got a lot of people signing up for it. So I decided to write that book, and I quickly wrote 3 chapters. And, you know, because I'm a research academic, I was doing a lot of research, but I cranked them out pretty quickly. And I had a big name publisher who wanted to do it. And all the other authors know what it's like to try to get a publisher to accept your book, a big name publisher. It's not, you'll probably want to ask that later on, but there's a lot of paperwork and promotion involved in the whole thing, and you know, market positioning. And so I cranked out those 3 chapters, and then I just kind of came to a spot where I was kind of stuck. I don't know, I just couldn't move beyond these 3 chapters, even though I just whipped through those. And a friend of mine was publishing her book, Fabienne Jacquet, and her book is called Venus Genius. It's also an amazing book about putting the feminine mindset into innovative organizations. And I saw what she was doing and how it was being promoted. And I said, hey, who are you working with to do this? And it was this group called the Creator Institute. And their whole thing is they're putting through authors. They have a whole program training thing, but their other big thing is never write alone. And I thought, this is kind of what's missing for me, is this kind of writing in isolation, which I did for the first 2 books and all my papers, and it can be very isolating. And so they have a whole, you know, meta group, and they have author coaches, and they hook you up with others to be kind of like your author compatibility partner, so you keep each other in check. And that process itself really helped. But the other thing that was really tough for me is they were really focused on story. And I was really not familiar with writing story. The big thing is show, don't tell. So don't give us, just the facts, don't line them up. I mean, really, it's to get the emotional engagement, you need to bring story. And really, they are also asking me to put my personal stories in there, which I was not used, especially in academic writing, not used to doing that, except for potentially putting your assumptions out there. So that wound up really being kind of the jettison to this other process that they have, which is that where are these stories coming from? You're going to go interview people to get your stories. So this is completely not the book I had started. I mean, I was completely going in another direction now. I started writing kind of like a research help book for mindfulness for IT leaders, which I think is still probably a helpful thing. But this is now lining up folks to interview, getting their stories and adding yours into the mix. A completely different transformational experience for me. And I met so many people along the way. Namisha, you're one of them. And I'm really grateful for that. To learn the stories of amazing leaders and be able to put them down. The third thing that happened is it was right at that time. It was right around 2019 where I became aware of this group, and they were just starting to cohort, and we all know what happened then. I just thought, what an amazing time to be asking leaders about working in moments when there's very little information to make decisions, and B, when those decisions are having a very high impact on other folks. And it just, it just opened itself up. And the more leaders I talked to, they kept introducing me to more and more folks to interview. And so that's really my experience, a very unexpected path. I never even thought of interviewing folks. It was always kind of a secondary research project for me. But just not writing alone and bringing in story and interviews from folks really became a transformational writing experience for me, and how this book came about.
Thank you, Douglas. And this is not like a flex, but yeah, I mean, I never in my life had I thought that somebody would include a small like blurb about products by women and my work in their book. So Douglas, thank you so much. And that was such an amazing and such an honor to be a part of this experience. I really want to go a little bit deeper into the process of writing a book, but I want to shift gears a little bit and really go into the challenges of being an author. And Douglas, I want to hear first from you, and then everybody else probably give me one challenge each about being an author. And Douglas, you can start here.
Sure. I'm already going to break the rule. I'm going to give you two. One is discipline. My writing, and there are different kinds of discipline. Some people write every morning, and I think if you can do that, even if it just crank out anything that's blurbing through your head, just to get stuff on paper, because editing is like 90% of writing anyway. So the discipline, I'm kind of a sporadic writer. So I'll go for like a week or two without writing something, and then it'll just start coming out. So that was one thing. My editor, I had a development editor, which kind of really kept me on track. That's the don't write alone thing. And the other thing was this thing I mentioned earlier, which was shifting from writing technology and academic papers into developing story. That was a huge, huge transformation for me. So I think those are my biggest challenges.
Amazing. Thank you. Who wants to go next? I'm going to call someone out. Aditi, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm going to state the obvious. Writing a book seems like such a gargantuan task. It's not even in the realm of reality for some of us, right? Like, we always lead with, one day I'll write a book. And the challenge, actually, you know what, maybe that's a challenge that a lot of us have, and it goes back to what Douglas was talking about in terms of isolation. When you want to do something that's the norm, you can find a lot of people who are doing it already. But when you want to write a book, not all your friends are also jumping in to the bandwagon and saying, oh yeah, let me also write a book. Nobody's doing that. You're probably the only person in your friend circle. And what was transformative for me was having colleagues who had all written books. So it was very obvious for me to know that this is possible. It's a very non-tangible benefit, but a benefit nonetheless. That is the importance of surrounding yourself with people or going out there and meeting people who make this almost seemingly impossible task look possible, and have conversations with them, learn from their process. Writing a book, as standard as it seems, it can be very, very different. Like for you, the discipline could look like something. For me, the discipline could look very different. So the more conversations you have, the more you associate with people who are already where you want to be, that can clear out that mental roadblock that we have that keeps us from telling ourselves, ooh, I don't have the chops of being a writer.
That's amazing. So we've heard rituals and disciplines, just go with the flow, feel your flow, and then accountability and building that community. Rebekah, I want to pass it to you. What's your challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I definitely enjoyed the writing process. It was a very creative, fun process for me. And yeah, I did all the like creating goals and habits of writing every day and stuff. I think for me, and this is probably a pretty circumstantial challenge, is that like after I'd signed with my publisher, I had started playing around with kind of what would be a cool book launch website. And this is basically the origin story of OwnTrail, which is that it turned into a whole company. And so I guess the challenge for me was that by the time my book was coming out, which, you know, it takes like a year from when you sign with your publisher to the book actually coming out, or it did in this case. And I ended up launching my company on the same day as the book came out. And I was so immersed in building a tech company at that point that like promotion or even talking about my book. I mean, I did a book tour that got stopped a little bit short by the pandemic starting, but like, you know, the promotion, like getting people to write reviews, getting like, I was just so focused on building a company at that point that the book, I was like, oh yeah, and I wrote a book, that's right. And so I think like the discipline to like try to promote and get in front of as many people and get the reviews, get all the things that you have to do, because there's like a whole marketing piece that goes along with it as well, was I think, I don't know, challenging or just something I kind of avoided, I guess.
And that's awesome. And that's a great segue into passing it to Annika. Annika, I know you mentioned that you are probably pursuing some additional opportunities. And was it the process of writing a book? And can you reveal more? Like, did it inspire you to explore like entrepreneurship or thinking about that?
I think so, because, you know, as I mentioned before, as you've mentioned, and as I've mentioned, I have a podcast as well, which Aditi has actually been a guest of. So I have to just highlight her episode because it's so good. But, you know, I have a podcast called That They See Spark, which really focuses on South Asian millennials. But I think the one thing that writing has given me that through just the process is that everybody has a voice, and it really matters how you utilize it. And eventually, whether you write fiction or whether you write nonfiction, it can really shape how you approach the world and how powerfully you get to speak and where you begin to find your confidence. And I think that, you know, going back to these challenges, the one thing that I think everybody who's probably in this room, truthfully, has faced or will face as they write their prospective books, and that I can guarantee every writer on this panel has faced, is who the hell is going to read my work? And it comes down to ultimately when you're doing your due diligence, you're doing your research, you're writing this book, and you're writing this first draft in particular, you realize as you go that your first draft does not need to be perfect. It just needs to exist. And that kind of gets ahead of the whole thing about who's going to read this, because ultimately your focus turns to, I just need to get my voice out there. I just need to put my voice to a page. And through that, you find a lot of confidence in being able to speak and being able to trust that your voice is unique. And you begin to notice the tiny little nuances about how you write and how your personality comes out through it. No matter how technical your writing is, you always have some signature, you know, kind of tells to the way that you write and the patterns that you write. And it kind of gives you confidence in your own voice. So I think, to answer both the challenge question and how my writing journey has shaped me, it's opened up a whole world in terms of confidence and in terms of recognizing where my strengths are and learning how to play to them. But it's also, you know, the challenging element is also, don't think about your audience when you're actually trying to get through this. The first shot, you just need to get this first draft out, and you'll find the confidence as you keep going.
Thank you. Thank you. And Shelmina, you did touch upon some of the challenges that you faced while writing a book, but is there anything else that comes to your mind before we move on to the next question?
So the one thing I want to share is I do not enjoy writing. And I mentioned that before. And so in 2019, when I decided I want to write a book, I looked for everything and anything else I could be doing so I could avoid writing. But then COVID hit and my calendar completely cleared up. It was almost like the universe was conspiring and telling me, just start writing. And you talked about discipline. So I put about, aside 2 hours, I'm going to write every day. And in about 5 or 6 weeks, I actually started enjoying the process. I started missing when I didn't write. I didn't become a good writer. I will never be a good writer. That is not my strength. But when I started enjoying the process of writing, the substance started flowing. So for those of you that don't enjoy writing, but have a message that must be delivered, don't be disheartened. Just keep writing and this will flow.
That's awesome. For the rest of the half, I want to get into the meat and potatoes of this whole session, which is, let's say I want to write a book. I want to start tonight. Where do I even begin? Like, what is my process? Like, where do I start? Should I start writing a draft? Should I reach out to publishers? Like, what's my starting point? And, I'd love for somebody to start and then the other person to say, okay, and, add on to that piece. So perhaps who wants to start this off? Like, Shelmina, since you spoke last, maybe you can start.
Oh gosh, I was hoping you'd call these experienced authors, but okay. For me, I actually knew nothing. And so I first asked someone who had published a book, and it was mentioned earlier that talk to people that have actually done it. That's a great idea. And it's a nonfiction book. So I just asked, what's the process? And they said, you have to write a book proposal. Well, what's a book proposal? So I read a book about what's a book proposal. I took a class on how to write a book proposal. I still couldn't write a book proposal. So I started putting stuff down, and then I had to find an editor that actually helped me package and create my book proposal in a way that I ended up with McGraw-Hill, but in a way that I wanted to go the traditional publishing house. Not only does it create credibility, but I feel like my audience is worldwide. And so the distribution was really important to me. So, I got help, put together a book proposal. It took me much longer than it took other authors that I have spoken to, but that was okay. I was starting, but because I was in sales and because I have been a leader in technology, some of my strengths translates into how to create a book proposal and how to sell and all that, but writing was not one of them. So got a lot of help there and complemented it with my ability to sell, and that created a good pathway.
Awesome. So, okay, the first step is you started writing this book proposal. Now I want to pass it on to, let's say, Aditi is right next to you on my screen. You create a book proposal. What's next?
Yeah. Writing a book was not my first stint at writing. And Shelmina, I cannot tell you how much I relate to your absolute abject just not liking the process of writing. I do not like writing. That is what it is. And I think that's another roadblock that people have, like, oh, if I need to be a writer, I need to love the process. Absolutely not. Treat it like burpees. Like, it's good for you, so do it, but hate it in the process, So just take it with a pinch of salt, because I too do not like writing, because it's a very involved process. You need to discipline your thoughts. So I don't enjoy it, but I had to do it. And my first stick with writing was writing research papers. So I dropped a dissertation coach Instagram meme in the chat, which goes back to not wanting to write, but you got to do it anyway. Now, when I started writing the book, I used that mindset of a research paper writer. So when we start writing research papers, when you think about writing a book, you start thinking about writing a book the way we read a book. That is, oh, I need to hammer out the introduction, and then I need to get into the body, and then I need to get into the conclusion. You don't have to follow that format. Start with something that comes naturally to you. It's like if you just sit to write, it will just come naturally to you. Make it a shitty first draft. For me, as a research paper writer, that was oftentimes my method section, where I had already conducted my research. I know exactly what the survey looks like. I know the measurements that I have doled out. It's a no-brainer for me. So I started with the lowest hanging fruit that got my grooves rolling. It was a lowest common denominator of me getting into the process of writing. It's almost like if you go to work out at the gym, this is you starting the what do you call that thing where you keep walking and running? This is a treadmill. There you go. So you starting to write the methods section, or starting with something that is so easy, is you going to the gym and starting that treadmill and just walking at 2.0 speed. Just make it super easy for you to show up, because once you show up and those wheels start turning, it's so much easier to launch into the creative process of writing, versus putting yourself in this precarious position of thinking, oh my gosh, what I'm going to write down right now is going to be profound. It's not going to be. So that's my advice for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aditi. And then, so we have, the first two steps, which is building out an outline, getting started, going with the flow, writing out like a draft. The next step is, my question is, like, let's say you have your draft, like the first draft, which is very, very drafty, version 1 ready. The natural next step is to edit and go to the, having it polished up. And I'd love to hear more from Annika, like what was that process like?
So for me, I have a little bit of a different writing experience altogether, because I think that with nonfiction proposals, and based on the expertise of the other panelists here, the proposal process looks very different than anything that I've experienced so far. I mean, it can potentially come into a fiction author's career. But for me, a lot of this has been, so I guess I'll just walk you through what I did for my first book, which was, you get it in the best possible shape you can by yourself, or with the help of an editor, if you're willing to outsource out and do some research on freelance editors who exist out there and who can kind of shine. It could even be a friend, a beta reader, somebody who reads it for the first time and says, this is amazing, or your pacing is off, or, yeah, I really don't like that scene. You need to fix these words. Sensitivity readers, particularly if you're white and you're writing about people of color, that's something that you really want to make sure you get accurately. And you might need people from that background to read over it and make sure that they can tell you whether you're nailing it or whether you need some work. But generally, sensitivity readers are a really good idea too. I think once I got my book into the best condition I could get it into, I went into this a little bit naively, I'm not going to lie. But I began researching agents who would represent fiction in particular. But you have to know what genre you write for. So if you're writing fiction, you need to know what the rules are for each genre, and you have to be able to categorize your book in something. You can't be like, it's women's fiction, cross romance, cross, young adult, cross sci-fi. Like, it's not going to work like that. You kind of have to have some parameters around what you're writing. And so each genre has different rules. For example, women's fiction can be, 80,000 to over 100,000 words. Romances typically are 80,000 to 100,000 words. They also have to have a happily ever after if you want to fall within the romance genre, or a happy for now, but they cannot end with one main character dying. There has to be some sort of, there's rules for every genre. And so once you can kind of sort your fiction into the relevant category, research agents, if that's the path you choose for publishing, whether it's going to be, there are big houses that have imprints that take people who are not agented. There are also self-publishing options, which are equally as amazing and give you a lot of control over your career. There's also traditional publishers like these big 5 or big 4, big 3, depending on how many mergers you're looking at right now. All of them, sometimes they don't open doors unless you have an agent. So look through your options and think about this, but this is all after your first draft is polished. So don't think about it until you've done the work. And then eventually, once you submit a pitch,
a sample and a synopsis, usually, to the agent based on what their requirements are. They'll ask for the full manuscript, and then you have to send the full manuscript. If they like it, they might offer representation for you. Going forward, then they will represent you. They'll walk you into any door at a publisher and say, I've got this writer who's got this really killer book, and they'll use their relationships to negotiate a contract. So it's a little bit different than writing a proposal, and it is a different approach. There's more control whenever you're writing the proposal on your own. There's different fee structures. There's different, there's just a whole different host of how much control you have over your career and how much trust you have in yourself to run your business, because once you're a writer, it is a business. So all of those elements, you know, you kind of have to know yourself, you have to know, but you don't do it until you write your first draft. And then after, or at least if it's nonfiction, then write your proposal. But if it's fiction, you have to have a first draft before you're going to get in the door. And it's got to be pretty. So like, you got to do your best to get it as shiny and as beautiful as you possibly can by yourself. So, you know, there are a lot of different avenues to getting published. And it really depends on what you're writing and how that project can be taken forward within the publishing industry, and what routes are open, or what requirements are needed, or what genre, you know, you're fitting into, and things like that. So you kind of have to be able to have some working products to be able to get it that far.
And I have one follow-up question for you, Annika, which is like, where do you find, like, do you have any resources that you can share to find agents within your genre?
I used Writer's Digest. So this was what, 2014. And so I used writersdigest.com, and they had like a really long list of agents. Now I believe there's something called Query Tracker, which allows you to track the queries that you're sending to agents. That's what these pitches are called, queries, when you're sending them to literary agents. And they have like different genres that you can select, you can filter by. A Google search will often get you like lots of lists of, like, let's say you say like agents who represent romance, or agents who represent young adult. They'll give you a lot of lists. You'll get a lot of Google searches from that. And Aditi just put in Publishers Weekly as well. So, you know, all of those are great resources, I think, across the board for everyone.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And Rebekah, over to you. Like, how different was your experience in publishing a book from everything that we've heard so far?
Well, I really liked the writing process. Is one of the big differences. I can't imagine forcing myself to write a book if I wasn't enjoying the process. So kudos to you to push through that. But you know, I still did need the kind of, you know, I still gamed myself a little bit with like setting goals, and you know, I'd have goals around like number of words to write each day and get in the habit. So I'll give one very practical tip. Is I use this app called Ulysses that basically it would sync between my phone and my computer via iCloud, which was one of my criteria. And it lets you also, because my book was this choose your own adventure book, that like basically the whole table of contents is this big decision tree. So like it took a lot of organizing of the different chapters and keeping track of like characters' names and like different plot lines and stuff. So it was really helpful for that. I really like the app. I'm going to paste in the chat here like a blog interview I did with the app after I'd been singing their praises after the book, which talks more about my process and everything, if that's helpful to anyone. But and then yeah, like it was technically like it's this fictional plot line, but I weave a lot of data into it. So it was interesting because I didn't know what I was doing at all. I just wrote the thing that I wanted to write, and it turns out like it didn't fit really cleanly into, like, it was hard to say, is this fiction or nonfiction? What genre is it? So when I went and started querying agents, same thing. Well, first I Googled, how do you publish a book? And then I, you know, learned about like querying literary agents. So then I Googled like a list of those and started doing that. And no one, like, you know, I got a few responses, but mostly people ignored me or just rejected me. And then, so basically, and this isn't overly replicable either, but I put something on LinkedIn that was like, hey, I almost done writing this book and I don't know what I'm doing. Does anyone have any like experience or connections? And someone that I was connected to on LinkedIn, I'm one of those people that just says yes to every connection. So I don't always know the people, but someone reached out and was like, oh yeah, I wrote a book. I'm happy to tell you about it. And so met this guy for coffee, and he, when I told him what I was working on, he ended up introducing me to his editor at his publisher, which is an independent publisher, Barrett Kohler Publishers. They're a B Corp. They only publish books that they think will make the world better. They're awesome. I really like them a lot. So he introduced me directly to his editor. So in the end, I ended up circumventing a literary agent, and then she like got it, and she was like, "Oh, I know what this is." She's like, "This is and now I forget what we even decided was. There's the book. Damn, what's this term called? I'm totally drawing a blank. But kind of book like the where they tell a story, but it's a business lesson. Oh, a business fable. A business fable is a kind of book like there's a bunch of examples of them that I haven't read before, but she's like, this is more like a self-help fable where it's like, it's a story, but it's like actually like teaching a lesson through it or whatever. And so she came up with kind of what the genre was and how to position it. And then once you get an editor that loves you, then they bring it to the whole like book publishing board and like basically pitch it for you. So I, in this case, had to write like a specifically formatted proposal for that, like in the format that they like. And then which she helped me with, and then took it to the review board and then got them to approve it. So yeah, it was, you know, kind of like working my network to find the right people. And that's how I ended up getting the deal with them. But like finding that right editor, both in terms of the process to get in with them, but then like once I was working with her, she was like, she's basically a lifelong friend of mine now. Like we became really close. She just got it. She made the whole book better. Like the whole editing process with her was really enjoyable and productive and everything. So so it turned out that was an enjoyable part of it as well. And yeah, so I guess that's how mine differed. And it's hard to pull out, like follow these steps from that, because you know, each person's story is a little bit kind of like on OwnTrail. It's all different nonlinear paths, right?
Thanks, Rebekah. And last but not the least, Douglas, how similar or different was your process? You've written a couple of books. Was it the same for both of them or different? I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, very different between the big name houses and this most recent book is in a hybrid publisher through the Creator Institute and New Degree Press. So, but a couple things. One is what Rebekah was talking about reaching out. And I think there's a secret power in asking for help. And I don't think people utilize it enough because we feel like, oh, we don't want to be vulnerable. I mean, asking for help is a vulnerability, some people think. But networking potential. I mean, in fact, Rebekah's story was a very networking, kind of story. You get people reaching out to you to learn more about you. You get the information you need to get. So I think asking for help is really an underrated superpower. I would also say it's hard to tell where to start. I mean, we've heard, I kind of enjoy being at the end to kind of summarize a couple of things, but we've heard a couple of different stories about how the process works. And all along the line, I was thinking, my books all started in different places. And I think, this is going to sound a little goofy, but I think it starts in your gut, right? Because where's the right place? Where's the right place to start to find love, and I don't know that I necessarily love writing or I hate writing. It just kind of like infests my being. And then all of a sudden I'm cranking out 3 chapters. Then all of a sudden I'm stopping. Then all of a sudden I'm being introduced. So my journey has been completely bizarro on this last book. And the choice to publish with the hybrid publisher was because I enjoyed the community that was being built with the authors, and B, the whole thing about advances, residuals, the big name publishers, they pretty much own the work. Not pretty much, they do own the work. And if they decide to stop printing it, that's it. It's not going to be printed, right? And if you want to actually use that material, you have to be very careful about what's in that contract, because they might own that. Like one of my next things might be a workbook I'm thinking of to be able to use in my workshops to accompany this. If that was, if this was owned by a big name publisher, if it wasn't in the contract, I might not be able to use my own material. So this was a very, very different process. And the other thing about this process with this idea of interviewing folks is that it was a far more organic kind of experience. Whereas when I was going to do that mindfulness for IT leaders, I had to do the whole book proposal thing. Every one of those things was kind of a different format and different questions, and takes a long time to get through. And they require you to give them a table of contents, exactly what's going to be. So you have to have the whole thing laid out ahead of time, because they want to know what's going to be in this thing, because they're going to invest the editor time and everything. In this other process with the Creator Institute, it was, as I interviewed people, I started learning more about what my topic was, and then I could delve more, and then I started going, oh, maybe this direction is good, and now I'm being introduced to these people. So the process of writing and researching, especially the process of researching, was a very, very different kind of process, and therefore the writing process came out of that. You know, I didn't start with the idea of like F.O.R.G.E.D is like 6 practices. It's like that came out of the writing. So I think, I mean, all the things were great in terms of, you know, learning, you know, the various kinds of where to find an agent and all those things. But I think the doorstep of it is there's not a right entry point. It's just wherever you start, that's the right entry point.
Thank you so much. And we have about 3 minutes left. And I'm so sorry for everyone who's here and has a bunch of questions. I'd encourage you to reach out to all of these amazing women and Douglas on LinkedIn, connect with them, and buy their books. They're incredible books. I've read each of them. It's amazing. But I want to end the session by asking 2 questions. What's your advice for aspiring authors? And what are some resources, like your top 2 resources to get started? Douglas, do you want to start?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again? I kind of missed it.
The first question was your advice to aspiring authors. And the second one is your top 2 resources to get started.
Oh, oof. Okay. My first advice is to just write. I mean, if you feel like you want to write something, just again, it's kind of what I was saying before. You know, there's no right entry point. Just start it. And then, you know, when it's time to start looking out to either proposal time or all the other amazing stuff Annika told us about, you know, fiction writing, I mean, that'll come in its time and you'll be researching that. You know, Namisha, I'm so sorry. I forgot your second question again. I apologize.
Yeah, no, it was just resources to get started.
Resources, I say if you haven't written before, well, first of all, I think we heard like 5 or 6 great resources already from the other authors. But I also would just suggest, I mean, my experience was for people who are first-time writers, both fiction and nonfiction and children's books and all kinds of stuff, the Creator Institute is kind of geared for first-time writers. So I would suggest checking them out. You can also look for, in LinkedIn, Eric Koester, Koester. He's the one that kind of runs it. He's an entrepreneur. He started that whole thing.
Thank you. Shelmina, you're right below.
So for me, it's just if you have a message that you know in your heart that it's going to create value for your reader, just type that message up, write it everywhere. So anytime you want to give up or you feel that this is too challenging, that becomes your inspiration to keep going because you feel like you're going to touch somebody else's life, that you're going to positively impact someone. And so I had to do that multiple times because it's easy to just say, this is too much work. Why am I doing this?
Awesome. Aditi, over to you.
For me, I'm just going to give you the 2 resources. Number 1 is since I was writing this book, like Douglas said and other authors have reiterated, it can be a very isolating process. And it's very hard to show up when the writing process is inherently challenging, plus you add the isolation aspect to it. So what worked for me was signing up for this or a service called FocusMate. It's a online virtual buddying system, which like you work with somebody who you don't know and you show up, right? Half the work is showing up. And I also logged into, and Douglas talked about this, mindfulness. I'm going to put their URL. It's honestly called averyimportantmeeting.com. It's a free service where 2 or 3 writers who run it. One of them hosts it, and they start with a 10-minute mindful meditation, and then you write together for 40 minutes, and then you come together and we talk about it. So that's my second resource. My resources are all showing up and doing the work. And the third one, bonus, this goes with what Shelmina said, is something that I printed and stuck it in front of my face for the entire year that I was writing. And this was this quote by Brian Clark.
Wow. Thank you, Aditi. Those are the really useful resources for sure. Annika?
Like Douglas said, you just have to write. But the other thing that I think that is a mental block that can often keep you from doing that is not calling yourself a writer. I think that we always have these random metrics for what we use before we call ourselves a writer. Like, well, when I have a book, I'll get it published. Guys, I'm on my 3rd book now, and I still have moments where I'm like, well, when I hit 5, maybe I'll start calling myself an author. And it's always going to be a moving goalpost. If you write, you are a writer. You are not an aspiring writer. You are a writer. So in that case, start writing and get that moving and start moving toward that dream. And I think, like I said before, your first draft does not need to be perfect. It needs to exist. So that's the only place you need to start, and the rest of it will come. And the other advice that I have to go with that is treat yourself like a business. Operate yourself like a business. You are your biggest advocate and your biggest proponent, and your biggest, the biggest cheerleader you have is going to be you. You need to sell yourself. So that starts with all of the self-talk, and it also starts, like Aditi said, with doing the work. In terms of resources, I've put my books that I've read that I loved in the chat box, but I would say for storytelling as a whole, whether it's fiction or whether it's nonfiction, both Story Genius and Wired for Story by Lisa Cron are amazing. And they really help. They talk about the neuroscience behind writing, in the sense that, like, what is storytelling and what appeals. And there are many times in these books where I'm like, oh crap, I'm doing this wrong. So, I think that if I'm still learning this, it's an awesome resource. It's something you refer to all the time. So I would highly recommend doing that. And if anyone has any questions about fiction writing in particular, don't hesitate to reach out, especially via Instagram, which is probably where I'm the most active. And my handle is at Annika Sharma, so just my first and last name. But don't hesitate to reach out, and I'm happy to jump on a call or help anybody that wants to reach out and get some advice or bounce some ideas.
Thank you. And Rebekah, I'd love for you to summarize and finish off the session today.
Okay, this one's not going to be a summary, and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. So you can take it literally, or for those of you that don't drink, take it figuratively. But the write drunk, edit sober, I think, is a good phrase, which is, we know it means literally, but figuratively, it's like, try to just flow and not think too much about it, and just let whatever come out. Messy brain dump when you're writing, and then be more focused and rigorous when you're editing. And just to be a goofball in terms of resources for that, I would say a bottle of whiskey and a laptop are the 2 resources you need. So I'll leave it at that. And I'm most active on OwnTrail and Twitter, so definitely feel free to reach out to me in those places.
Amazing. And with that, happy Friday to you all. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all these amazing resources and all these amazing information nuggets that you shared today. And we'll be sure to share the recording and everything else via email. Thank you all.
Thank you, Namisha.
Everyone, thanks for having me. Namisha, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, even when you're
Thanks, Namisha.
very much under the weather, we appreciate you pulling through.
You killed it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Shelmina, you're on mute.
She left. Oh, no, she's here.
She's here.
Cool. Thank you.
Oh, still muted, but
you're still muted.
Bye, everyone.
See you. Bye.
Bye.